And I have the pleasure of welcoming you to the first part of the celebration of the Center for Public Representation's 40th anniversary. It's kind of amazing as I reflected back on my 37-year history with this organization. I realized that I've had a few different relationships. The first one of which was being employed by the Department of Mental Health and working with the center to implement a consent decree that had just been agreed to in the Brewster case. When I left the Department of Mental Health and went to run one of the service provider agencies in Springfield, I frequently connected with folks at CPR for counseling on a variety of issues. And then, lo and behold, I came to work for the center for 3 years, and then served on its board and as its board president for, I can't remember how many years now, but for a lot of years. So it's been a very rich experience for me. And one of the things that is so amazing to me, and I often think of the Margaret Mead quote when I think about the work of the center, and I think you're all familiar with this: never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And that, to me, really, in a way, captures what this organization, this tiny little organization, has done over its 40-year history. And I would actually just like to take a moment and ask the folks who are currently working for CPR to just stand for a minute. Just stand up for a minute. Now, stay standing. I'd like to ask the folks who have worked for CPR sometime in the past to join us.
Stephen, you have to stay standing. You can't sit down.
Or maybe
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for doing that. These are people who have, over the years, powered the work that this organization has done on behalf of people with disabilities. Thank you all for coming, and I would now like to turn it over to Bob Fleischner. Bob has been with CPR for 38 of its 40 years, and has always been a source of tremendous help and wisdom in all of the times that I have consulted with him. So it's a pleasure to turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, well, welcome everybody. We're doing this in a couple of panels, and we have some videos between the panels. The first panel is a look backwards, and I'm going to introduce the panel members together, and then they're going to each give a short presentation. So I'm going to start at the ends and work to the middle. Start with the tight ends and work toward the center of the line. First person I want to introduce is Dr. Michael Hogan. The panel here is actually a reflection to some degree of our litigation. And as you know, litigation is a large part of what the center's about. And it's impossible to have litigation without a defendant. And Dr. Hogan was one of our very first defendants and one of our best. At the time the Brewster case was filed, Michael was the regional director for the Department of Mental Health in Western Massachusetts, and he worked with us to form the consent decree and did tremendous work with us to implement it. We always hope that defendants in our cases have both the vision to envision a better world and more integration for people with disabilities, and the talent and skills to implement whatever comes out of the litigation. And Michael Hogan definitely fit that bill. Mike went on to be commissioner in Connecticut, Ohio, and New York, and was the chairperson of President Bush's Mental Health Commission, which really set the blueprint for mental health services in America for the future. So we're very pleased to have Mike here. On the other end, in our litigation, we also need allies. And one of the unique things about the Brewster case was that one of our allies and our co-plaintiffs was the Massachusetts Association for Mental Health. And I think in its long and storied history, MAMH had never been involved in litigation until the Brewster case. Dr. Donna Marsh is now the CEO and president of MAMH, and we continue to work with her closely on any number of important issues in Massachusetts. Donna also had the distinction of being a defendant in our case when she worked with the Department of Mental Health, and she was later the equivalent of the Commissioner for Mental Health in Rhode Island. And she's a great friend to the center and a great friend to all of us. Next to Donna is Jim Burley. Another feature that we have in all of our litigation is that we try to choose our partners very carefully and our co-counsel. And we've been incredibly fortunate in several of our cases to be able to partner with the law firm of Wilmer Hale. And we were particularly fortunate when we brought the Rosie D case that the Wilmer Hale partner who worked with us was Jim Burley. Jim brought to that case his incredible lawyering skills, his great sense of strategy, and his huge heart, which meant a lot to all of us and to the clients. And finally, and most importantly, we can't bring cases without clients and without people with disabilities on whose behalf we're litigating. And Nikki Chandler is the guardian for the lead plaintiff in our Hutchinson case. Nikki has brought to that case and to us her inspiring vision of what community can mean for people with disabilities and ensuring that the people in her lives and her life are served in integrated settings with meaningful, important services. Nikki's also a member of our board, so we have two of our board members up here. We're very pleased to have them on our board, and I'm going to turn it over to Michael Hogan.
Thank you, Bob. It is great to be with all of you for at least two reasons. One is so many old friends who it's wonderful to connect to again. But the second is to be with a group of people who all share deep and personal commitments to a better life for individuals who live with differences that our society doesn't, at least not yet, value sufficiently. And to be not only with this group, but with this group at this occasion to think about and reflect and to honor a very small group, as has been said, that has achieved disproportionate influence. Establishing the conditions under which people with disabilities can thrive in communities is pretty hard in this society. And it's hard in part because of the fundamental nature of our political structures. I can remember a piece by a political scientist at Yale, Ted Marmer, who said in almost an offhanded way in one of his articles that good services for people with serious mental illness in the United States, and he might as well have said, might have as well have mentioned other conditions, were fundamentally almost impossible to achieve in our system. And that was because the requirements for good care were well-defined yet well-integrated supports of many kinds that would have to be orchestrated both across different units of government and across multiple levels of government. In other words, it would take a considerable amount of power to get this done. And we have a political system that's set up to defeat that. That's set up to defeat the massing of power, most especially when that is on behalf of people who don't exercise a lot of political power. So thinking about it that way, one might wonder why Dr. and I and others here have had such long careers working in those systems, flailing at windmills. But it also brings to mind why it's necessary to, at times, invoke the third branch of government, the courts, to resolve this, and why doing that requires effective advocates. So, as Bob said, my connection is about 36 years old. In 1979 and 1980, the Brewster Decree was signed. Ray Breen, our great good friend and for many of us mentor, went into to Boston to become the deputy commissioner. For some reason, he thought I was up to doing his old job, which was, I'm not sure that was true, but it was I appreciated it. And in that same year, this is just a personal comment, my youngest sister had her first psychotic break. So we've had these careers in mental health that have looked a little different. I think that other panelists will reflect maybe a little bit more than I on the first principles that CPR has helped the nation establish. But I want to reflect from a slightly different perspective on the ways in which it seems to me that CPR's work has been distinctive. One perspective is that when somebody is considered, as Bob Dylan just was, for a Nobel, when they're considered for tenure, or when they're considered for a Hall of Fame, we reflect on a body of work. We don't reflect on one spectacular success. And CPR's body of work is summarized partly on the back, because what's summarized there is legal decisions, and there's been more to this than legal decisions. The body of work is just extraordinary. I don't believe there's another mental disability-oriented group or firm in the country, with the possible exception of the Bazelon Center, which is sort of bigger and better funded and in Washington, D.C., that has anywhere near this kind of contribution. So one of the things that is unique about CPR is doing very good work for a very long period of time. A second really distinctive attribute that Barbagolia mentioned, that it's been experienced by many of us who served as collaborators while also serving as defendants, Adana and Andy and others. Too much legal advocacy is characterized by a blood fight for a decree or a judgment that is then followed by inattention to implementation. And implementation is not assured by legal judgments. CPR has since the beginning worked very effectively with collaborators inside as well as outside of government. I can just recall so many ways that this was necessary, inside and outside conversation about the shape of rules and regulations. Work to help convince legislators who might have been skeptical and perhaps jealous because this was a decree was something negotiated by an administration. They hadn't been consulted. So to recognize that work with legislatures is required. Work with local and community officials and private sector people who were not bound by a decree. So this ability to stay with things longer than the legal victory, to see them through until those victories amounted to change in people's lives, is really a distinctive experience. In thinking about this, I was reminded of a particular example of this give and take kind of experience. And Steve will probably remember this, a particular individual at Northampton who'd had a horrible life and horrible experience, which had made her quite skeptical and resistant to things. And finding her a place to live in the community was of great importance, and so we worked very hard to do this and finally put together what we thought was really a very nice arrangement for her to live in, and went through the process of talking about this with her, and she turned us down. And I happened to be meeting with Steve, and got on my high horse and sort of yelled at him. I don't really yell, but sort of up one side down the other about your client, and we did all this, and blah, 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 blah. Steve waited till I got done and said, "Do you feel better now?" I said, I do, a little bit. And he said, "Good, so now you need to make her a better offer." And it was just so immediately apparent that that was fundamentally right. But to say that in a fashion that was principled and clear, but with a sense of humor, just exemplified that process of working with people. These unique strengths to collaborate as well as doing great legal work are, in my view, also markers of CPR's legacy. And it made me think, in driving over here and preparing for this, about how many people who have been in and around the CPR orbit have gone on to exercise leadership in other cases, not just as counsel, but as court monitors and special masters, and as, in some cases, as sympathetic defendants. So little pebbles that were dropped here have spread across the nation in that regard. This is true legally also. I mean, there's no direct relationship between Brewster and Olmsted, but Olmsted is Brewster in a broader way, decided by the Supreme Court. And it's similarly true that many of the things that we tried to work together to create way back then, 35, 40 years ago, have ended up becoming core parts of best practices in mental health care. I think about the supported employment that Rich Toscano was developing, 15 years before we had publications and research. And so, not because of me, but because the field has gravitated this way, if you go through and read the report of the President's Commission in 2003, it'll look a lot like the Brewster Decree. So, this is a remarkable legacy. We should all be grateful for it, and we should be grateful particularly that this gathering doesn't mark the end of something, but marks just a midpoint or a way stop toward continued work on behalf of the people we care about. And for that, I and all of us are very grateful.
And with that, I guess we'll pass it all the way down to Don.
Well, thank you, Michael. That was a great launch for our remarks. I'm really honored to be here today and to join you in celebrating what I think is safe to say, and as Michael said, an unparalleled record of achievement carried out by all of you at the Center for Public Representation on behalf of people who have health and disability conditions that put them at risk in our society for segregation, for disparate treatment, and in some cases worse, for neglect and abuse. You have long been the champions of these individuals, and for those of us who were trying to work on behalf of those folks inside state government, you have been an important partner. I've really been honored to collaborate with you for many years. It's probably about the same length of time as Michael. I first I didn't actually meet anybody at CPR, but I first heard when the Brewster case was filed and the Department of Mental Health was trying to figure out the consent decree or various terms of program implementation. I was an area director in the eastern part of the state, and I had prior run a not-for-profit organization that provided housing to people with disabilities. So somebody from central office, Marlene Ross, who many of you might remember, came out to say, could I help frame this part of the case? I actually knew Bob from before Massachusetts state government even, and later when I went to central office, went to a meeting that Bob arranged over in the North End, because the Department of Mental Health central office was just on the fringe of the North End, and met Bob and Steve to talk about things that we were going to do and what was going on with the case and whatever. It was an ex parte meeting over some pretty good Italian food, but I had never met Stephen before, and I had talked with Bob a bit about this, and I said, I just want you to know you're not being tough enough on us. Which I don't think was exactly what they were expecting from one of the defendants, but more to the point, I really learned something in that, which is my anxiety about having enough demands placed on us that no one else in government could screw it up, if you will, was met with a point of view that I've come to appreciate over the years, and I think is a hallmark of the center's work, which is that it wasn't really necessary to do that if you had a collaborative working relationship that was founded on mutual respect, and where you could engage people around their area of common interest and concern, which are the people we're all trying to serve. And it's been a very powerful lesson. I took a peek at CPR's website, which I must admit I haven't looked at in many, many years. And you know, right up front, you talk about your commitments to promoting change at a systems level, but really change that's targeted to serving individuals and protecting their rights, using litigation, but also consultation and technical assistance to get to where you're going, publishing and disseminating knowledge and information. And I would say that, you know, I've actually been reviewing a lot of websites lately because I have recently come to the Mental Health Association and we're long overdue for updating our website. So I've been kind of trolling around on the internet trying to see who has a great website. I hadn't looked at CPR's, but I also, one thing I noticed in looking at many organizations that I know, they have things on their website that they're actually not doing, or they've not really put their mind to achieving. I'm reminded in looking at yours that the things you set out as your goals are things that you've in fact achieved. And that your vision, particularly of life in the community, is one that's really outstanding. I wasn't aware you were going to have all of these wonderful cases displayed out here, so I had kind of gotten myself looking at and thinking back about some of the cases you've been involved with over the years, and I mean, there are literally dozens of them. And they cut across, you know, individuals who have, of all age groups, individuals with different health conditions and disabilities, but at their core, they are about people who have been treated differently, who have not had the opportunity to live among the rest of us with the same benefits. And they have at their core gone at segregation and gone at running operations in those segregated settings that are not individualized in any way. You've really been leaders in so many areas, in implementing the Americans with Disabilities Act, in serving people with conditions that range from autism to traumatic brain injury, social and emotional conditions, mental illnesses, substance use conditions. I got thinking about the fact that some of the great achievements that are finally bearing fruit. One thing that was actually today, this afternoon, there are a group of people, some of whom would like to have been here, who are receiving the Manny Carballo Award, which is a wonderful award given in state government for extraordinary service and effort to do an extraordinary thing. And that has been the effort that was undertaken to create a place outside of the walls of a prison for individuals who are committed under Section 35 because of their substance use conditions. So finally, after many years, they've moved the women who were at Framingham State Prison to a treatment program down in Taunton. So this is being celebrated today. Not too many people who were there probably know that it was, and I'm not going to get the year right, but it's got to be at least 20 years ago that CPR took the first action with government to compel government, who was depriving women with addiction of their liberties, not only depriving them of their liberties and failing to provide them in exchange treatment, but confining them instead of in a treatment facility in a prison, and brought action to compel at least the provision of some treatment to people. It's taken all these years since to see some meaningful change take place and have the Commonwealth create a therapeutic environment that would meet their needs. The work that's been done on behalf of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, whether they were in state schools, whether they were being denied their rights to vote by a local town or use a town pond, which were early cases that CPR brought, whether they were being tortured in the name of treatment, whether they were being congregated in what was nominally called the community, but segregated from the rest of us, be that in nursing homes or other facilities. These are all things that have set precedents for the rest of the country. And the focus on integration and the ability to kind of see the gains that we made in the early days in Brewster and similar cases about fixing reforms for people who were isolated in institutions by creating community care systems, carrying that across disability groups has now been carried to some of those community settings we created that now need to be somewhat disassembled and restructured in favor of more integrated care, carrying that also from residential settings to employment settings and other places. So I want to kind of comment before closing on a couple of things. While CPR has migrated its work from individual rights cases to class actions, from CRIPA to Olmstead actions, and cutting across populations that, as I said before, have been at risk for segregation and discrimination. They've always used law as the tool for reform, but in following that, the reason these reforms have been cemented, and Michael said this, but I think it bears repeating, is because they also understood the importance of targeting regulatory reform, financing reform, structural service delivery reform to make practice changes stick, to make them, if you will, sustainable. They brought a deep technical knowledge, not only of the law, but of best practices in the implementation of services, of best approaches to restructuring regulations. Another lesson I learned from people at CPR was the advantage one has at a table of busy bureaucrats, of which I was one, when everybody's trying to figure out who's going to write the first draft of those standards to promote client dignity, if anybody remembers those being written, the regulations that govern community services. And of course, people at CPR, their hands shoot up first. Oh, we'll do the first draft. Well, the power of the pen, right? So you get that first draft going, a very comprehensive draft, of course, coming out of CPR. And there's not much but a little bit of tweaking that the bureaucrats really end up doing at the end of the day. And so it's really the willingness to roll up sleeves and get to work on every aspect of making change that has been a hallmark of your success. The last thing I'd like to say is that you've really taught others, you've not just helped others do things, but you've taught others, if you will, to fish. Not just, I'm thinking, here we are at a church, right? There's that old thing about feeding the masses versus teaching them to fish. So the work across the country to help other members of the disability bar, members of the private bar do this work has been extraordinary and has really extended your impact in an extraordinary way. Your willingness to get on planes regularly and be in those places to make that happen. You've really set a standard for thoughtful litigation strategy and collaborative settlements planning and targeted implementation efforts. So I salute you and I thank you.
I'm very pleased to be here to celebrate the 40th anniversary of CPR with the CPR members and extended family. Congratulations on 40 wonderful years, and I guess we should wish you 40 more, but even beyond that. I entered the life of CPR maybe about halfway through that timeline, back in the late 1990s. I was an antitrust litigator in a large Boston firm, a firm that was very much committed to pro bono work, but my own ledger was a bit in deficit at the time. And a memo came around from CPR inviting anyone at our firm, and perhaps at others, interested in assisting them on any number of projects. Gee, it was a long list, maybe 20, 25 projects long, to raise their hand. So I looked down the list, hoping I could find something that would help me improve my ledger on pro bono work, and I saw an entry about stuck kids, which I thought that's interesting. And I read a little further, and these were Medicaid-eligible children who were caught in institutions to receive mental health care because they couldn't get the support they needed to live in their homes and communities. And they didn't need to be in those institutions. It was just the only answer for them. And there's a great variety of institutions, apparently. And there were even more kids who were at home, staggering from emergency room to emergency room in crisis, who just couldn't get services. So this sounded to me like a very worthy cause. I didn't know anything about Medicaid at the time. I didn't know Medicaid from Medicare. I certainly didn't know EPSDT, which I later, I'm not sure I can even remember what it stands for today, but I do say the letters in order now. So when I looked at it, I said, gee, this should be a reasonable commitment. The partnering idea was great. They can teach me what I have to know, even though I know little about this. Massachusetts is a center of the healthcare universe, a model of good government. This will probably go pretty quickly once we point it out with a little vigor. I'm sure everything will fall in place. So out of that misestimation of mine grew 10 years, maybe more than 10 years of work on one of the most complicated and rewarding matters that I've been involved with in 40 years of lawyering now. It was rewarding in two senses, not only for the services that were secured for all of these kids, and there were thousands of them as it turned out, but also it was one, on a personal level, one of the most rewarding personal and professional experiences that I've had, so I thank you for that. I want to focus just a little bit on the Rosie D. case itself. As an example, it's certainly not even the major one in that long history. There are probably 30 or 40 others. But just a few details to give you an example of the kind of hard work and effort that CPR puts into cases and is required in order to secure the kinds of improvements that they have been able to secure over the years. First, I need to correct one error in the program where I'm listed as lead counsel in Rosie D. To be sure, I led the Wilmer Hale contingent that worked on the case, but this case was Stephen and Kathy's from the beginning. They were the architects of the case and the leader throughout. We had a wonderful team. Catherine Rucker and Marcia Boundy worked on the case, Frank Lasky for mental health legal advisors. So we had a powerful team in place. We worked for a couple of years to try to put the case together. The facts were few and far between. We had to try to prove a negative that services were not being provided. We had to try to identify how many kids were out there who were eligible and who were not receiving services. We had to find named plaintiffs. And last, we had to meet with state officials to see if we could persuade them that perhaps some improvements could be made without the necessity of litigation. And they weren't all as agreeable as some of our panel members up here have proved to be. We couldn't move them, so we ended up filing a complaint. I think it was in 2001, in October, not too long after the terrorist attacks. So it was kind of a grim time, but definitely there was a need to go ahead on behalf of these kids. The case was brought in Springfield in federal court under the EPSDT provisions of the Medicaid Act, basically saying that the Commonwealth, as a recipient of federal funds under Medicaid, had to provide all medically necessary services to children. And we had 9 named plaintiffs, and we were seeking an injunction, nominally at least against the officials of the Commonwealth from the governor on down, who were charged with the responsibility of ensuring that those services were provided to these kids. The case went on for about 3 years before trial and went up and down the First Circuit on a motion to dismiss, and there were thousands of pages of documents to review and countless depositions and 15 or 18 experts involved. It was certainly the equal of any large commercial case that I had been involved in as of that time. And there was no, at least as far as I knew, unless Stephen and Kathy had a secret one in a drawer somewhere, there was no real template of about how to pursue this kind of case. Lots of cases had been brought and resolved in consent decrees. Not that many, I think, had tried, and those that did try, there weren't a lot of tracks left on how to put it together. So we spent a lot of time discussing how to do that. I think we ended up kind of surrounding the issue to show that services weren't being provided rather than perhaps proving it directly, although there was some of that too. The trial took 6 weeks. I think we had 500 or so exhibits, 30 or 40 witnesses. We put on parents and guardians of the named plaintiffs. There was an expert who had done a random survey of Medicaid-eligible kids in the Commonwealth, and it determined that they were receiving appropriate services. We had experts who examined the Massachusetts program directly and opined that it was not sufficient. We had program directors from other states that had programs that were somewhat better and could show that it, in fact, could be done. I think we even had a financial expert showing that it wouldn't cost a whole lot more to do. So we came at it from all directions, and about 4 or 5 months later, Judge Ponzer issued a decision finding that the Commonwealth indeed had not met its responsibility of providing these EPSDT services to children, Medicaid-eligible children in the Commonwealth. That was a great victory. Little did I know that that was more like the beginning than the end. Because that then moved into, okay, now what do you do about it stage? The judge ordered that the parties try to work together to come up with a remedial order that would be satisfactory. That took a year and involved more litigation than working together, but an order finally was entered, and it was an important order that affected, we estimated 15,000 or more kids who were in the class. It ordered the state to provide intensive measures to identify and treat kids in severe emotional distress, to ensure that they had the full array of services that would be available to them that would allow them to live in their homes rather than being caught up in institutions, and to make sure that these services were under the auspices of an intensive care coordinator who could bring everything together and make sure that a plan included everything that was necessary to keep kids in their home. Since that time, I think that order was entered in 2007, much has been done. There have been a lot of improvements, a lot of services have been adopted. We're not to the end of implementation yet. The case outlived me. I've retired, but CPR charges onward. And hopefully there will be an end in sight, but certainly progress has been made, and it's been a great victory for children in the Commonwealth. I think beyond that, it has had an impact nationwide. Not only the legal precedent that was provided by the decision, but the remedial order itself is a good roadmap for other states and providers of what is necessary to allow these children to have full lives and successful lives living at home. And hopefully we did provide kind of a template for litigation for other cases that followed. At least now there was, I don't know how good it was, but there was a roadmap of sorts that seemed to have worked at least once. For CPR itself, I'd like to think it made a difference as well. I think it enhanced CPR's already wonderful reputation as advocates and litigators, excuse me, who are willing to go the full distance, who would not only negotiate, but would bring suit and see a suit to the end, and then even after the judgment, would stick through however many years it took to make sure that the remedy got in place for the plaintiffs. I'd like to close with just a few remarks about the partnering approach that CPR used in that case, and of which I and my colleagues were beneficiaries. I think partnering with private law firms or with other public interest legal groups is a wonderful development, I think for at least 3 reasons. First, I think it allowed this small band called CPR to leverage their expertise and to bring many more cases that they probably could have brought if they had to staff everything themselves. And you can see by looking at these boards in the back, and if you saw the panoply of cases that CPR is pursuing now, I don't know how many of them ever sleep, you would see that they have brought many, many cases around the country, and I think partnering is involved in many of them, if not most of them. So that's good for CPR. It's good for private firms and private lawyers like myself, because it allows us to get into very useful and important and interesting kinds of litigation that we could not do without the guidance and coaching and maybe sometimes patience of folks who were professionals and experts in the field. So it's been good from that standpoint. And finally, I think hopefully the case benefits as well. If you bring lawyers from diverse backgrounds with diverse instincts, it can lead to some lively discussions that hopefully help to shape the strategy and implementation of the case that's being pursued. I know we had many discussions in CPR, and again, thanks Stephen and Kathy, Catherine, and Frank for their patience with me teaching me this area of law. So, finally, I am proud to say that, like Rosie D., my involvement with CPR does continue. I'm a member of the board and grateful for that opportunity, and it allows me to follow all these cases that CPR continues to bring. It's a great model and a great story. I'm very fortunate to have been involved in a small part of this wonderful 40-year journey. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am grateful today for the opportunity to thank and recognize the work of the past 40 years of the Center of Public Representation. My background is nursing with a focus of caring for individuals with disabilities for 40 years as well. As a board member of the center since 2009, I've learned a great deal about law. In June of 2003, my best friend sustained a severe head injury when he was hit head-on by another motorist. He was hospitalized for 2 months and in rehab for another 3. For the next 5 years, he existed in a nursing home, followed by an institution that provided not much more than basic needs. Living conditions were unsanitary and medical care was marginal. It was at this time that I learned of the class action suit called the Hutchinson case against the state regarding individuals with brain injuries. I made a real test of myself, convincing CPR to allow me to do whatever I could to be part of this case. The lawsuit filed in 2007 was quickly passed, and in December of 2008, my friend moved into his new home closer to his family and friends. He was 59 years old at the time, and the following week we celebrated not only his 60th birthday, but this new beginning. The past 8 years far surpassed my greatest expectations for him. He is treated with patience, respect, and kindness by the staff that support him. He received a citizenship award for his work at a local dog shelter, walking the dogs and baking biscuits for them. He has displayed and sold his photography in a local bistro, gardens and grows vegetables in his yard, and lives his life in a way that is meaningful to him. His medical care is excellent because we now have choices. Unfortunately, he has been diagnosed with cancer and is on hospice. He continues on a downward decline, but remains in his home, surrounded and cared for by the same caregivers. I am able to see him every day and assist and make recommendations for his care. I will be forever grateful to the fine human beings of CPR and Berkshire County ARC for the love and compassion that changes the lives of so many individuals.
Thank you to all the panel members. That was a really diverse and very, very inspiring presentation. The next thing we have is a short video of some people in CPR's past. and in their present. And we'll show that. After that, there'll be a break with some refreshments down the hallway. So indulge us for a moment while we set up the video. And the parents free to go down and watch the video.